Lifting family, welcome back. So this video is going to be a movie review, and this movie was something that had definitely been making the rounds in terms of popularity and in terms of the what ifs in the lifting community, which is the Westside versus the World movie. And overall, I thought it was a great movie. It was one of those things where you just kind of sat back and watched it. I found that the development of this story was something that seems to be something that's much like Louis is, which is just a character that is a bit more discreet in terms of what he wants released to the public. And that's where this movie gets kind of interesting. I think that a better title would have been Louis, the West Side Story, and not necessarily on a play of the West Side Story as a movie, but just in the essence of what this movie came to be, which is mostly a telltale story more about Louis, and Louis is definitely West Side, but at the same time, the movie seems to just open up more doors for questions in terms of how everything about Louis and the development of West Side and how things just are and what is just and that's a lot of weird words, but in terms of the movie, this is something that seems to be going into. It definitely develops the story of Louis and his lifting career, and then it also goes into some more prominent lifters that are at or were at Westside Barbell. The interesting thing with those lifters is that I had heard the names, but I thought that I thought that some of the coverage would be a little bit more so on people like Mark Bell, who definitely seemed to gain some prominence in terms of after the Bigger, Stronger, Faster movie. But at the same time, it just seems like he was definitely a face that I thought would be a little bit more a piece of the movie. Some of the other people, like Dave Tate, another person that just seems to have really has his roots down. I mean, with Elite FTS, so that was another one where there was a little bit on Dave, and there was a little bit of like a cameo in terms of, because this is not a movie, this is a documentary, but at the same time you get to see some clips of Dave and then some of the understandings of Dave in terms of him and Louis, and basically how Dave had admitted at one point in the movie that his goal was to kind of bury Louis when it came to the lifting aspect. So that was one of his goals. So Louis definitely seemed to challenge a lot of people, and that's a lot of what this movie dives into, is just how much Louis pushed people in terms of being able to make sure that they are the best athletes that they could be, and how he hand selected people in terms of who was allowed to basically be a part of Westside, and how you basically kind of had to earn your stripes, and also the rough and tough side of Westside in terms of the types of people that basically would be the stronghold, or the people that would really take shape and take form at this gym. Just because there was one person that had mentioned basically being pummeled by some of the West Side guys because he was using a bench that he was not supposed to. There was a commercial side of the facility before West Side had moved a few times, but when West Side had a commercial facility and then basically the underground in the backside of that, and someone had basically just decided to forego the rules and ended up having to pay for that. The interesting thing with Westside is just that the members don't really, they're members, but there's no gym membership. And I think that what's interesting is that there was a interview where Louis had mentioned how one of his biggest expenses was breakfast, because he's paying for people's breakfast, I believe each morning or maybe just every Monday, but he was paying for several members' breakfast, and that was a large expense that was coming from Westside. But that's not mentioned in the movie. That's just something that was an outside interview from something else that's not related to this, but just to kind of show you that Louis definitely invested in the athletes that are part of his gym. And it also kind of serves as a interesting piece where Ed Cohn had mentioned at the end of the movie, that's where they really kind of dive into just a little bit more about Louis as a person. And like the last 5 minutes is really when the movie kind of gets into a little bit more of the persona of Louis and his perception, or the perception of him by others, by people like Ed, by some of the other lifters in the gym, just like him being more like a father figure to certain people. They had just mentioned at the end of the movie about that, and Ed had mentioned how he had gotten injured at a certain point in his career, and Louis was the one that was basically there that was helping him out almost immediately, whereas the sponsors of Ed at the time, at least one of them, just kind of fell short of making sure that he was taken care of. But I also found that an interesting piece just because the movie does dive into the concepts of recruiting athletes to be a part of Westside. And I thought that that would be an interesting measure of recruiting an athlete, is just basically showing your support, you're investing in them. So that's something that would then get a very prominent figure like Ed Cohn into Westside and becoming a Westside lifter. And Westside being a gym where the members don't pay, that's another question that kind of opens up the door of what really is Westside. So I think that this movie being something that should have been titled Louis the Westside Story, I think that more focus on Westside, and again, even though Louis is Westside and Westside is Louis, having a movie a little bit more focused on like how does Westside Barbell even really work? I mean, how is that something that, how does Louis make money? What does Louis do? That's not something that really is understood, other than the possibilities of what would come from someone that is Louis Simmons potentially making money as a coach and as a speaker and something like that. I mean, he does train professional athletes, and they go into that a little bit, but the movie just kind of touches base on a lot of different concepts that as you go through the movie and as you get to learn a little bit more about the history of Westside, and then some like the big names, like the top guys at Westside. That's really what's focused on here, is mostly on the top guys at Westside. I think that that's something that there's more pieces to this puzzle. There's more pieces that could have been told here, but the movie being around an hour and 40 minutes of just I found the movie interesting. Again, I found that I had more questions at the end of the movie than anything, and that's why I definitely think that it deserves the 4 stars that it gets. And I think that the additional star maybe could have been something that, with Louis having a little bit more of a say in the movie, if he had chosen to basically endorse this movie a little bit more, I think that that would have helped out a little bit, just to kind of guide the movie a little bit better. But Louis definitely seems to be focused on the lifting. He focuses on lifting because even in the movie they talk about how he was bailing people. He was bailing one specific lifter out of jail, and I think that that's another, again, an investment piece. You have to look at that from a business perspective of how much time someone is putting in to a given lifter to basically make sure that Westside is a name that other people know of and that they also want to be a part of. So with that lifter basically being someone that was getting into some trouble and then was needing to be bailed out of jail, that's something where that's a component of business. I co-own a business, so I mean, with something like that, if we're looking at different manufacturers and one manufacturer is willing to help us out a little bit more and the other one is not, those are choices that you have to make. So with Louis, seeing how much time he's put into a specific lifter, and even though that lifter is getting in trouble, I think that he saw the benefit being that he's going to get him back into the gym and get him focused and refocused on lifting and achieving world records. And that's something that, again, would then draw more people and more elite athletes into Westside. So I definitely, the focus seems to be on that it is Louis, and Louis is Westside, and Westside is essentially focused specifically on moving weight and lifting weight. And that is the ultimate goal, is just being the best and having the best lifters that would then be a representation of Westside. And Louis definitely mentioned that this is something that Westside will end when Louis ends, even though the legend of Louis and the legend of Westside will live on. If Louis is to pass, there is no passing of the guard here. So that's another interesting piece where Westside will go down with Louis. Even though the legend will live on, that's something that is just, it's another interesting piece. But outside of that, it was definitely interesting to read a lot about this movie. And there definitely seemed to be some issues with the Kickstarter campaign in terms of, apparently there was some background where money had been stolen and then there was a lawsuit and a bunch of stuff. So just kind of the movie itself just definitely was one of those things where, even though it was trying to take off, it still seemed like it was running into some issues. And that's definitely, it was an interesting take. And I had seen from a Reddit user that the movie didn't seem like it was going to happen, or at least the money that they had invested in, then had said that they were basically going to be getting some early release stuff and a DVD copy and a few different things. Like, they were kind of expecting that might not happen, because there was $100,000 raised planned to be raised for the movie, and then they ended up raising somewhere almost or somewhere around the range of $140,000. So just interesting overall. And I think that it's definitely a movie to watch, though. I'll put a link down below so that you can watch it. I have that link to Amazon. That's where I ended up watching the movie itself. But just overall, an interesting movie. And again, 4 stars because with this one, it was right about there. It was pretty darn close in terms of making a really great movie. But it opened a lot of doors for a lot more questions.